A single article sparked my interest to make this online show, so without further ado, welcome to World Wild Economy, where I'm going to talk over, discuss, and most importantly analyze macroeconomic news and the crazy and funny things that happen in the worldwide economy. On today's episode, I'm going to be covering the incoming European big tech tax led by France, Trump's questionable reaction to that tax, as well as the US-China trade tension hitting record heights amidst the Fed's decision to lower interest rates. Within the show, I'll aim to be well-read, critical, and informative, as well as to, I'm going to aim to simultaneously learn, teach, and entertain. I'll be going through hot news stories, articles, and reading through the comments of various articles, giving my reaction and commentary. If you're watching and listening to this on YouTube, you'll be able to see my screen where I'm actually going to have certain articles and information up, but more importantly, my wonderfully beautiful face. And if you're listening to the strict audio version on the podcasting platform, then I guess you're missing out on half the fun, but at least not the info. Right, so what's been happening? I'm going to give some contextual information on this. So if you have been reading the news, you may or may not have heard of the recent developments in French politics, wherein Macron and his fellow cabinet have been in the process of developing a certain tax on tech companies. Namely, specifically, is the kind of tech giant group GAFA, so Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple. And the tax essentially would be a 3% levy, aka a tax, on the total revenue of the firm within the area that they operate in. So, for example, the French tax would cover the French area, etc., etc. This would disable firms ciphering and diverting their profits to lower tax jurisdictions and various tax havens wherein corporate income tax is essentially lower, so that they avoid the said tax essentially or pay less of it. It certainly serves justice for the government as they'll be getting their fair share of what the companies owe them. And whether it's actually a fair share or not, that obviously depends. It's up for discussion, it's up for debate, and it depends on the way you kind of lie on the political and economic spectrum. But the point is, these firms are notorious for kind of tax avoidance, tax optimization, as some people call them. But at the end of the day, they're making lots of money and paying their taxes at the minimum and out of the countries that they operate in. So that's kind of the background on this topic. Macron has been going at it for a while, and since all of the above mentioned GAFA companies are in fact American, supposedly, Trump has been involved in the process of French legislation over Twitter, social media, and news in general. So essentially, he's threatened a tax of his own, like he always does, namely tariffs, etc., etc., the kind of general economic threats that you often hear from him. I also believe that he said that him and his fellow team politicians have launched an investigation into this whole debacle, the French kind of tax, and UK, also the UK are following them amongst other countries, the kind of digital tax they call it. And essentially he's launched an investigation into that to see whether it's, kind of fair play on their side and if they're kind of creating an unlevel playing field for various companies, French versus American companies, European versus American companies, etc., etc. But this came out a few weeks ago. I don't remember hearing much from Trump on the investigation, but I don't follow him on Twitter too much, so I'm not up to date with Trump specifically and his Twitter specifically as I should be. But this actually makes me wonder, because I can imagine that Twitter is a genuine goldmine for Trump, his policies, what's inside of his head, and what's kind of about to come out from him. And I was thinking whether there's people in investment banks or someone's developed a software that's kind of meant to be full-time tracking Trump's Twitter and seeing, kind of digesting what he has to say, and see what kind of impact that's going to have for traders, and immediately kind of inform the traders on the trading floor of Trump's recent tweets or whatever. I think that would be quite interesting. I was wondering, I wouldn't be surprised if someone is employed full-time in investment banks just to digest and quickly kind of come out with implications of Trump's tweets. Anyways, let's get back on track. That's kind of where we're headed now. Like I said, the French digital tax, the French legislature that's been developing recently, or about the MNCs, the multinational companies, as well as Trump's reaction to France's reaction to these big tech companies and the European business operations. So let's look at the now. So just this past Tuesday, today I'm recording this on a Saturday. It's the 3rd of August. So, just this past Tuesday, there have been some very intriguing developments in this whole saga. And this kind of one development, this article that I'm going to show in a second, is literally what started kind of this whole show off. It's really the inspiration. So cheers to that. Hopefully you find that as amusing as I did. Otherwise, it would just kind of make me look weird. But either way, just actually, before I get into this article, I'm going to show a clip from the Ben Shapiro Show, Sunday Special. It features a guest which gives actually very good guidance on how to interpret what Trump says. And I think it's very crucial in this because, Trump tweets about a lot of stuff. And if you take things literally, if you take things as they are said by Trump, you might have a bad time separating fiction from reality. Anyways, I'll play the clip.
Look, I have always said you just cannot take Trump literally. If you take Trump literally, your head is going to explode. You've got to understand the overall message that Trump is putting out there. Because in a lot of ways, he is really transparent. He is a transparent person on one level, even if he lies a lot. And you have to be able to juggle that and understand, okay, I get that when he's saying this, he's actually meaning this. When he's saying this, he's actually meaning this. So if you're going to let this aesthetic really throw you so off course, then you've really got to, take a big stiff drink at the bar and start realigning how you feel about this person, because
So, he really says it like it is. You can't take what Trump says literally, as in word by word, literal, because it will make this all seem wild. You need to look behind the literal and kind of get the meaning behind, see whether he's being sarcastic, making some stupid joke, or, actually being literal in what he says. That is not to say that, Trump's tweets are cryptic or they've got some edgy double meaning. It's simply that, you can't take things word by word. Literally, it may be not the best trait to have for a president of the United States, but if you've got half a brain, it shouldn't really be a problem. Unlike it is a problem for the American media, the global media outlets, because you can say that it's their job to kind of interpret things differently and make a story out of anything. But essentially, especially on Twitter, it's hard to spot sarcasm in just plain text. Without a lot of guidance aside from that. So I guess, it's people get a bunker story out of that. They interpret things incorrectly, yada, yada, yada. Right, so let's get onto this article. It's from Financial Times, so it's fairly reliable. It's, it's decent journalism. So this is the article that I was talking about. French minister calls Trump's wine tax threat utterly pathetic. I especially like the image on this. I mean, you can see the guy, the actual minister, just laughing at Trump's proposal or threat. He's literally, you can see it from his expression, if it was taken from that specific time, that he simply cannot believe what he has witnessed, and he doesn't know whether people are joking or not. Anyway, so you can get a feel of what's been happening with Trump and his reaction to the big tech tax, digital tax, and it is essentially that. Actually, I'll start reading from the article just for context. France's agricultural minister has described as utterly pathetic President Donald Trump's threat against French wine imports in retaliation for a new tax to be imposed by Paris on the big tech companies such as Facebook, Google, Amazon, and what was it, GAFA, Apple. I think I said them all. Anyways, it's the third time, this is the minister, it's the third time that the US president has threatened a tax. The third time in a year. We'll see if he does it now. Of course, I fear a tax, but it's absurd as a political and economic argument to say, you tax the GAFA, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, we'll tax your wine. It's utterly pathetic. That's pretty funny, in my opinion, what Trump has said. Obviously, it's funny as an kind of outsider, but in reality, it's got some serious economic implications. Essentially, Trump is seeing these GAFA companies as, very American, big tech, kind of innovative companies, and to kind of retaliate on what France has been doing with their legislature regarding the big tech tax. He's, taken a token item of France, much like they did a token item of America, as it seems to him. And for him, that's wine, that's French wine. So essentially, Trump's reasoning for this is, what does he say here? The US should be the only country taxing our great American technology companies. I don't think that's an argument. I really think, I mean, maybe you can see that as an argument, but it's essentially a pretty crappy one. It's essentially saying that if me and my friend are playing football or whatever, and it's kind of like, even though Trump sees someone else's ball in his house being his ball. That's kind of what he's seeing it as, and it's kind of weird. You know, you can't play with my ball in your house, whatever. It's hard for me to kind of provide a kind of example of what he's saying because it's pretty absurd, but I hope you get the gist of things. Essentially, on the article also insists, the minister insists that the 3% turnover tax to be imposed on big tech groups is to ensure the companies pay a fair tax on their online operations in France instead of diverting their profits to low tax jurisdictions. That's essentially what's happening here. The UK is also planning a similar tax as well. That's essentially what's happening here. That's what I said before, quite literally. And it's not about whether a company is American, European, or like from Australia or whatever. It's the fact that they've got operations in a certain country for which they're not paying the taxes for in full. They're, like the article said, and like I said myself, they're diverting their profits to low tax jurisdictions. For example, Ireland or Luxembourg, I think they've got low corporate tax income. Ireland's corporate income tax is, I think, 12.5% or 10%. It is very, very, very low. So obviously, it's an act of tax optimization, as some people call it, a bit of a euphemism for companies like the GAFA companies to be registered for tax or VAT or anything really within a country with low tax rates and operate worldwide as they do usually, obviously to skip on a bit of tax payments. Anyways, that's essentially the story. It's pretty absurd. We'll see what happens. I mean, like I said earlier, it's hard. You can't take Trump's kind of saying, you can't take what he says as literal, but at the same time, he wouldn't stop. There's nothing stopping him from placing kind of these tariffs on wine, on French wine. I mean, he said that he will, maybe he can. It's pretty absurd, but we're yet to see what happens. Anyways, we can read the comments. I've read them before. Maybe I commented on this. I don't remember. Essentially, we'll have a look at the most recommended comments. So the top comment, this is a good one. Amazon, I thought I'd seen that name before. It's on an invoice I received today. Amazon, whatever. Essentially, the comment shows an extract from Amazon's registrations for VAT. They've got a VAT registration number in Luxembourg. So that means that's where they're paying their VAT taxes, whatever. In Luxembourg, so obviously not America, not France, not whatever. I also received an invoice from an Irish company called Facebook for the ads I run. It's funny, how fiercely the US president tries to defend Irish and Luxembourgish companies. They should offer him von der Leyen's job. That's a funny comment. I like that. Essentially what he's saying that even though Trump is saying that they're American companies, the GAFA companies are actually taking advantage of the tax havens and essentially have a big chunk of their operations for the purpose of tax payments in firms, in countries, like Luxembourg, like Ireland. So essentially, that's the point. It's not that deep. It's a pretty funny comment, but it is true. Trump's defending the American companies who are actually just paying their taxes elsewhere. Anyways, let's go on. Taxing luxury goods. Trump is a genius. That's also another comment I like and I'm going to speak about. I thought about this myself. I mean, what the comment exactly is trying to say, I'm not sure of. It's just a one-liner. Literally, it says taxing luxury goods, ... Trump is a genius. ... So obviously there's a hint of sarcasm in there. But essentially luxury goods, okay, so in economics we split goods into, inferior, normal and luxury goods. This depends on the changes in income of people. So essentially if you're poor or if your income is falling, you're more likely to buy inferior goods, such as pot noodles. Normal goods, you buy more the more your income increases. So for example, a nice steak for dinner or whatever. And luxury goods are things like wine. So when your income dramatically increases, like sports cars, that kind of stuff. So these kind of luxury goods are essentially bought by rich people, wealthier people. And I think the sarcasm within that comment, or the kind of sarcasm that the comment is trying to portray, is the fact that Trump is very often anti-tax. He's lowered, he changed the tax kind of code. He's lowered corporate income tax, and he's meant to be pro-rich, whilst taxing the goods that the rich buy. Essentially, more taxes and more taxes on the rich through the taxation of luxury goods. Trump is a genius. So, maybe on a political side, it's not the smartest thing by attacking a part of his kind of voter base or whatever. But with luxury goods, they're also very price elastic. So when the prices of the, let's say French wine, because that's a luxury good, increase, people will very quickly switch to, let's say, another wine or another bit of alcohol. They'll substitute for cheaper goods. So that's kind of the theory. It's really not that deep. I won't go too deep into this. But in general, that is the story. It is, there's more Trump hate at the bottom. Or maybe not hate, but, some people are laughing at Trump's critique of French wine. He also said that, it doesn't matter because American wine is much better than French wine anyways, even though he doesn't drink, supposedly. So yeah, that's just a bit of banter in the comments. You usually find that in these articles, just people laughing about Trump. Quite rightly so in this scenario. It's pretty funny. But yeah, that's essentially the story. So just to quickly recap, essentially, France has been developing a digital tax on companies, on their revenue, not their profits. So much like, essentially with profits, you can divert them, like I said, to lower tax jurisdictions, tax havens. But with revenue, you earn the revenue from a certain, country, you have to pay it to that country. So it's a smart way of kind of getting some justice in the system, I guess you could say. So yeah, that's been happening. Trump reacted to that with, maybe he's joking, maybe he's not with the French wine tariff, but we are yet to see. Definitely, it'll be excited to see how this unfolds because personally, I see the good in the digital tax, and it's a bit more of a fair way of taxing these companies who just operate in the whole of Europe, but only pay their taxes where it's kind of where they're meant to, or where they kind of, it leads to them paying less taxes than they technically owe. But yeah, that is essentially the story in a nutshell. It's a short article, it's a short story for a big kind of topic that's been going on for a while. I'm pretty sure they've been talking about the digital tax for a long time now, rightly so. Anyways, let's get on to the next story. US-China trade tensions hit global markets. That's the title of the next article and the story that we're going to be talking about. And it's a big one. So Trump has literally yesterday, 2 days ago, just on Thursday, has announced a 10% tariff on Chinese imports to America worth $300 billion. So essentially, if no trade patterns change, that's $30 billion worth of tax revenue, as well as increased prices for consumers of these goods. Right. Well, that's kind of the headline. Really, that's the topic in a nutshell. But what does this mean? That's kind of the important thing. What does this actually mean? Well, like I said before, depending on the price of a good and the changes in price, there'll be changes in quantity, bought, sold, demanded, whatever. So there's two kind of scenarios in which this can play out. Essentially, it depends on the types of goods that are going to be imported. There'll be placed a tariff on, etc., etc. The first case scenario is if, let's say, you're importing steel and tariff. Trump has already got tariffs on, I think 20-25% last time I checked. And what that leads to is essentially, since steel and aluminium are raw materials, they're used in making of cars, bike frames, cans, whatever. What that leads to is the companies that import them. Sometimes it's hard for them to substitute, right? How many different countries and domestic kind of producers have got the steel and aluminium at a lower price, or enough kind of supply to meet our own demand at all. So what does it do? It means that they have to keep importing these goods at now a higher price of by 10%, and the cost of production increased by 10%. So the first producer increases their prices by 10% to keep the margins as they were before, or whatever. They pass it on. They pass the costs on to the next chain of production, whatever, up until the end consumer, which now has an increased price of 10% because there was no possibility to substitute to a cheaper alternative with steel and aluminium, and tada, domestic consumers are now paying higher prices for what they paid lower prices before the tax. A second kind of scenario is that they switch, these producers switch to domestic, or these companies switch to domestic producers. So this, this is good. This is what Trump wants. But if the domestic producers were efficient, effective in their production, their prices would be competitive, meaning that if you have to have a tariff to switch to domestic consumers, to switch companies to domestic producers, then it means their prices are also higher. So in the end, your prices are higher. Prices go up because of tariffs, even though there might be more domestic kind of involvement in the production of steel-made, aluminium-made materials and bike frames or whatever. Prices still go up. That's not great. It's inflation. It's for the same amount of goods, you've got higher prices. That's not fun. And this has all been happening in the context, in the background of the recent Fed rate decision to lower interest rates it was 25 basis points. So essentially, a basis point. Let me put it this way. Interest rates in America or the Fed rate was 2.5%, I believe, recently. So a decrease in 25 basis points would move the Fed rate, federal fund rates, from 2.5 to 2.25. Right, that's 25 basis points. Trump was also vouching him. He was pressuring everyone on Twitter and all that kind of stuff for a 50 basis point decrease. So from 2.5 to 2, in other words. But this is an example of expansionary monetary policy, which is meant to speed up the economy amidst the kind of trade tensions now being higher than ever before. And even then the stocks took a hit, even though the interest rate fell, which a lot of people were anticipating. There is now more trade tensions than ever. There's prices might still increase because of more tariffs. And there is, in general, a lot more uncertainty in economics, even in the economy. The economics part itself, I'll get onto in a sec. But that's what happened. Let me read a quick extract from the article. Equities were hit hard, so that's stocks. Wall Street's S&P 500 fell 0.72%, its fifth consecutive daily decline, while the Nasdaq Composite slid 1.32%. Frankfurt's extra DAX 30, which is home to a range of major exporters, fell 3.11%. This is like in 1 day, 1 or 2 days after Trump's news. I think in 1 day. And London's FTSE 100 lost 2.34%. So the numbers in these indices usually tell you how many companies the index is made up of. So S&P 500, that's the 500 biggest firms in America, and so on and so forth. So essentially, the stocks didn't like this, even amidst the lower interest rate, which usually boosts stocks and economic activity in general, like consumption and investment, because essentially with lower interest rates, the cost of borrowing is less, so people borrow more, they invest more, etc., etc. Stocks were hit hard, and the worldwide economy looks to be in a bit of a pickle, to say the very least. Anyways, let's go on to the comments. That's essentially the story. It's the high trade tensions, lower interest rates, low inflation forecast worldwide, and for the global economy and the trade, it's looking quite dim. I'll read a specific comment because I read it earlier and I've really liked it. It's about the economics part, which I just said. Let me read it first. 1 second, where is it? There it is. Right. John Montague says, or that's his nickname at least, so the market dips and Trump pressures the Fed to cut rates so as to bring the dollar lower and thereby increase trade. That's the theory. That's the theory. That's what the textbook says. And then he moves on to say, Fed cuts rates and the dollar rises. As it opposes theory. Trump wages trade war against China. The dollar rises further. I think that's also against the theory. I'll explain in a sec. And the stock market takes another tumble. That's expected. Actually, kind of. It depends. Clear as mud, this process. Textbook, it ain't. Great. This is a great comment. I really like it. So essentially, when you cut interest rates, the demand for your currency falls because essentially less people demand your currency because they see interest rates as a return on investment. So let's say if the interest rates in country X are very high, I will buy that currency and keep my currency in a local bank over there for it to appreciate with a given interest. Well, if the interest rates fall, there's less return on investment. So, I don't want the currency as much. I'll find my investments elsewhere. That's very basic economic theory in a nutshell. And so the dollar should fall, but instead it rose after the rate decision. Trump wages war against China, the dollar rises further. Right. Obviously, if this comment is true, I don't remember exactly the changes in the dollar, but essentially, with the trade war and waging trade wars, the dollar should also fall because there's greater uncertainty in how well the economy of America might do. So less people might want to hold on to the dollar because it might not be worth as much a few months from now when trade is at an all-time low, for example. That's kind of how people look at it. And so textbook it ain't. It is not textbook at all, apart from the stock markets that take another tumble. Again, with a trade war, yes. With lower interest rates, no. As I explained earlier, it should aid economic activity. Let's go back to another comment here. Right. Glad to see someone standing up to Chinese tactics. Amazing how short-term greed has allowed Chinese hegemony, I don't know how to pronounce it, grow unchecked. Chinese protect their industries, steal intellectual property, restrict foreign ownership in domestic companies. About time to level the playing field. The structural shifts are a necessary byproduct of decades of short-term trade policy. Imagine if the UK or US restricted foreign ownership, protected domestic industries as China does. Imagine the outcry. Trade has been one way for far too long. A very popular kind of counter comment, and how is that any different from what the West has been doing to other nations for centuries? Yeah, I mean, protectionism isn't unheard of. Neither is the Chinese having kind of these weird, very protectionist tactics to boost their own economy and screw over others. I mean, they're holding on to a crazy amount of US dollars. Obviously, they're, I don't want to say the Chinese government's malicious, but all the things that he said in his comment, it's something that China does. And obviously, as for the West, I mean, they're not perfect either. Everyone wants their economy to do well, and especially now, there's more protectionist policies and more kind of anti-globalization policies in general than there has been over the past few years. But I mean, the European Union, it's one big bloc which protects its inside kind of internal countries and has high taxes on everyone else. So this obviously isn't just something that China does and it has been doing for a long time by itself. It's something that everyone does and has been doing. But that is essentially it. It's a very interesting kind of event. I mean, interesting. It's intriguing it will be interesting to see kind of what's going to come out of it, because there's been a big mix of expansionary and contractionary and protectionist policies all in the same time, and they've been at great heights. Like I said, high trade tensions. Fed rates have fallen the first time since, was it 2008 or 9? So obviously a lot of people are seeing a reflection, or kind of they're seeing what happened in the last economic kind of downfall, crash really. So a lot of people are uncertain because of that. Maybe there's a recession already. There was actually one comment about that. Let me quickly read it. Let's have a look. Recession is here. We are just choosing to stay in a state of denial. Remove the government spending and take away the subsidies. The markets will crash fast. It's not fake media. It's fake markets. That's a bit of a truism. I mean, obviously, if the government didn't spend any money or didn't do anything and take away the subsidies, there'd be less economic activity. But that's kind of what they're there for. They're there to aid the economy in the best way they can, even though they don't always do that. But fake markets. There's who knows exactly how overvalued we are now. We've been in about a 10-year bull run. Maybe it's coming to an end very quickly. It will be interesting to see, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of opportunities to pick up cheap investments on a rather cheap kind of basis. But anyways, that's what's been happening. To recap this article, 10% tariff of $300 billion worth of Chinese imports planned, or I think it will come into effect soon. Equities have taken a hit. Interest rates have started to fall, started to decrease to increase inflation. And, it's just a big clusterfuck, really. There's just a mix of all sorts of policies. And, inflation is low. Forecasts are being cut day by day. And, it's pretty wild. That's kind of the point of this show. It's pretty crazy, but I'm very excited to see how this folds out. I'm 20 now. I've been learning economics for 3 years now, so I've actually been taking a more active role in what's happening, and as such, it's been an opportunity to learn. So anyway, guys, this marks the end of my show, my first Worldwide Economy show, episode 1. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been educational, entertaining, whatever. You can check me out on Instagram, Investing Intellect, YouTube, or whatever platforms, it's all the same name. I wish you very well, and I'll see you next time.